This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by
Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 best-selling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
We went out for night patrol, nose into the north bank of the Vinte Canal. We had acoustic sensors. You could put these sensors out and you had a little portable radio earphone, and it had a background tone, but if anything came close to it or felt vibration, the tone would switch, it would go up. And so I got to do that, one night, and you're kind of half asleep and, half alert at the same time. And actually we got a tone. And so I said, tone, we got a tone, So two of the guys jump off the boat.
What is the difference between the CIA and the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency? I think when you were there was some sort of disparity in their reporting and their assessments.
Yes. We got zilch from CIA. It was always one way. I understand it's still that way between the military intelligence. I don't know. But they would give us nothing. We had one of the things that happened after the invasion of Cambodia was that the Lon Nol government, with his Praetorian Guard, tried to stampede the ethnic Vietnamese who had lived in Cambodia. They're on both. The border had changed over many years. There were ethnic Vietnamese living in Cambodia. There were ethnic Cambodians living in Vietnam. To a certain extent, this nationalist movement, that was the way Lon Nol thought he could galvanize the Cambodian population for the war that the Cambodians were going to have to fight. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up in New York, the way states, New Yorkers kind of look down on New Jersey people just because, it's got nothing to do with anything, but because it's Jersey, you know what I mean? Something like, well, it's the same everywhere in the world. The Cambodians look down on the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese look down on the Chinese look down on the Vietnamese. There's always this friction, ethnic friction between them. But Lon Nol tried to stampede the ethnic Vietnamese out of Cambodia. I think there was a total of 30,000 that eventually came out and came down to Vietnam. We had 18,000 in Ha Tien living out in tents in the flat areas, Vietnamese who had lived in Cambodia who were stampeded out. The way he did that was the Takeo massacres. I found out later from Special Forces guys, the people that did that shot up a bunch of Vietnamese were Lon Nol's Praetorian Guard guys. They did this on purpose to make it a public issue, which would scare Vietnamese to get out of Cambodia and so on. And I actually was there the morning after it happened with the head of Army. There was the Delta Military Command, the G2 for that came up and asked me to accompany them into Cambodia. And we went to Takeo and we went to the lycée where all this massacre happened. and it's in Anson, Anson is the journalist who was the first one there. It's in it's reported in his book.
Wow. Introducing the BCM Stock Mod 3 and Marksman Risers. Built from years of real-world experience, the BCM Mod 3 stock is the next evolution in M4 accessories. Minimalist, snag-free, and just 6.4 ounces with double-walled H-beam construction for unmatched durability. Paired with the Mark III Marksman Risers in 0.5 and 0.8 inches. The Mod 3 offers total customization with 6 mounting positions and forward or reverse orientation. It delivers a consistent cheek weld for passive night vision or CQB. For high-ready weapons manipulation, it features a removable diamond textured butt pad, non-slip grip panels, and a quick adjust design with integrated sling attachment points. Plus, its patented internal latch system and ergonomic lever ensure rugged performance with tool-free installation. Proudly made in the USA, the BCM Mod 3 stock, built to outlast and outperform. Get yours now at BravoCompanyUSA.com. And James Jesus Angleton at the CIA. You mentioned him in an interview, and thank you for sending all these. By the way, see my notes right there, yellow stickies. How did he assess the information that was coming out of Vietnam from you on the Navy side?
I befriended Admiral Rectanus, who was Zumwalt's N2. I befriended him a few years before he died. He used to come out and visit in San Diego, and we got to be pretty good friends. He's the one that informed me. He said Angleton never believed the bona fides of our agents. Now, we had at least two separate things going on. We had an SCI network called Sunshine Park in Cambodia that was run by Vietnamese Naval Intelligence, okay? As far as I know, still, the CIA had virtually nobody in Cambodia. So they were always picking our brain and so on. But Angleton and CIA never believed the information that the Navy produced. I forgot. I had my own not SCI network in Cambodia of Blackbeard Collection Plan Collection Team 5. I expanded that all the way up the Cambodian coast to Thailand during my tenure there. Okay. We were getting reports from Sihanoukville. We were getting reports from Angkor Wat. We were getting reports from along the border and so on. Apparently, Angleton dismissed all those things because he couldn't believe supposedly because he didn't believe that we had good agents or SCI agents in Cambodia. As a result of that, the CIA always contended that all the supply was coming from North Vietnam, down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, through the Sihanouk Trail into Cambodia. When I started lecturing about this, I said, wait a minute, that's like 800 miles over jungle, swamps, mountains, under constant air attack 24/7 from the U.S. And that's where the volume of weapons is coming down and stuff. It doesn't make any sense, especially when you can drive 2 trucks 60 miles from Sihanoukville to the border on roads that the U.S. built for the Cambodians and stuff. The only thing I could conclude was the CIA's support of that theory supported Air Force and Navy bombing of the Ho Chi Minh Trail from North Vietnam all the way down for most of the war. If you say all the weapons are coming in from North Vietnam down the trail, that suggests you can keep doing the bombing. So it kept them in the news and in air operations, and also was a little shot in the arm for the munitions industry when you're doing the constant bombing all the time. I know that sounds a little cynical, but stuff happens like that. Do you know what I mean? But to me, as a practical matter, the fact that they wouldn't believe Chinese munitions were coming in by shipload in the hundreds of tons to be easily offloaded and brought down to the border on the Cambodian side of the border and distributed and infiltrated across made no sense. And don't forget, this is the same Angleton whose best friend in MI6 was Kim Philby, the famous Russian spy in MI6 when he was posted to Washington and stuff. But no, he wouldn't believe naval intelligence.
That is so strange. Now, at some point, you see actual physical evidence, bill of lading, some paperwork that is marked as miscellaneous, but you have physical evidence that weapons are coming in to these ports. Is that right?
Yep. In June, after the Cambodian incursion, Lon Nol's brother, gave us in naval intelligence and the other military intelligence guys access to a room full of documents, of boxes of documents. There were bills of lading, there were manifests, invoices, all kinds of stuff that confirmed, I think, at least 77,000 tons of Chinese munitions and supplies coming into the port of Sihanoukville. Admiral Tanis told me after they did the whole vetting of these things, the Navy, the SCI intelligence the Navy had about Sihanoukville was only 5% off what was proven with the documents and stuff. Well, so Angleton was dead wrong on that. In fact, if you look at William Colby, who was CIA director then, his memoir book, he has a chapter called Sihanoukville, which is 3 pages long, and it's like, oops, guess we screwed up.
And he apologizes for it, doesn't he?
Yes, exactly.
It's incredible. Now, when you were there, did you look at the war through the lens of winning or losing strategically, or were you just focused on the tactical intelligence gathering?
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I think I looked at it as trying to make the biggest effort I could make under the situation we were faced with there. I mean, you've been a combatant. Winning or losing on the big political turn, war is just another instrument when diplomacy fails. Do you know what I mean? I didn't think of it that way. I thought of, okay, we're in this situation. We've discovered all this is happening in Cambodia. And what can I do to help, number one, our turnover, and number two, help the Cambodians as much as I could under their circumstances, because they're going to bear the brunt of this against the NVA and the VC and the Khmer Rouge. You know what I mean? At one point, everybody was shooting against everybody when we first went into Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge were shooting against the North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese were shooting against us. The Viet Cong were shooting against everybody. It was just unbelievable how confused it was and so on.
Yeah.
But I just tried to do the best we could. And that included political intelligence. And also on the Sihanoukville mission, we weren't so sure about Lon Nol back then. He was the new guy in. We knew his family had been benefiting from the Chinese weapons delivery to Sihanoukville and stuff. And the guy might flip again. Do you know what I mean? If he did, I think it was pretty clear that we were going to do something to take out the port. We would have had, whether that was a quarantine or, you know what I mean, or whatever. And that was, from my standpoint, part of my mission is how do we deal with the port if we have to deal with it in a negative fashion? And that worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I was asking that because I remember going to Iraq 2004 and then going back in 2005 and 2006 and seeing how things had gotten a lot worse and wondering, hey, should we be doing something different? So I was curious if you had the same experience.
I didn't really have any. I mean, I thought what we were doing was as effective as we could be under those circumstances at that time. Later, I figured out that at least what we did in Cambodia in 1970 gave everybody, all American troops in Vietnam and Navy, Army, everybody, some breathing room to do the turnover, to get the hell out of Vietnam and turn it over to the Vietnamese.
Yeah, and the lens of history shows that you were absolutely right. In the book here, what mission of all these different missions that you went on stands out when you think about your time in Vietnam?
The thing I remember the most was the first PBR Night Ambush, because that was like really scary, but you had to be really professional at the same time. And it just, I mean, I don't know whether it's adrenaline or what, you never feel as alive as when you have that kind of risk. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Tell me about that one.
We went out for night patrol, nose into the north bank of the Vinte Canal. Back then, I don't know if you guys still have them, but we had acoustic sensors. You could put these sensors out, and you had a little, like a portable radio earphone, and it had a background tone. But if anything came close to it or felt vibration, the tone would switch. It would go up. And so we go. They had blown the gates of the Vinte Canal. Typically had higher water level in it to have deeper draft, but those gates had been blown up by, I don't know, by us or by the Viet Cong or somebody. So the water was very low and the banks were quite high above. So you were sort of hidden by this foliage bank. The banks were the spoil from the canal that the French had dredged. Okay. And they were covered with all kinds of stuff. So they'd go off the boat and put the sensors on the Cambodia downside of the wall of the canal.
Okay.
And so I got to do that, one night, and you're kind of half asleep and, half alert at the same time. And actually we got a tone. And so I said, we got a tone, So two of the guys jump off the boat and they go, well, anyway, it was like a water rat or something, running close to it. Not a guy. What you're afraid of is a guy crawling up the bank on the one side and then and tossing a satchel charge into your boat or something like that, But anyway, it turned out it was okay. Then we heard human noises on the far side of the canal, which was really the way to attack us because we were always looking toward Cambodia and that side, but they could come from behind the Vietnam side and do a job on you. So anyway, then we, I don't know. Did you guys have M16 still or whatever they called them?
Yeah, we had the more modern variant, the M4, 5.56, so essentially 223.
Okay, so the problem we had with those in Vietnam was they were so barely stable, ballistically stable, that if there was a leaf in the way or something, it would throw it off course. So we'd always carry an M14 on the boat, the higher caliber.
Sure.
Because that would penetrate anything. So the guy that was in charge of that shot up the area, and it turned out it was like some kind of parrot or something like that was mimicking American voices and so on.
What? That's crazy.
So I don't know what it was, but anyway, you just get worried about that.
Amazing. What was the mission where you do the port survey and find out that they're dredging the port and come up with a plan that if you need to take out this port, all you really need to do is take out that dredge? Tell me about that one.
That was the Sihanoukville mission, the so-called top secret mission to Sihanoukville.
Yep.
I had to rendezvous with an LST in the middle of the southwest monsoon out in the Gulf of Thailand. Probably the most dangerous thing I ever did was getting aboard that LST in 14-foot waves, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I got on that, we went, the whole reason for the trip was Navy guys were delivering a transmitter. The Khmer Rouge had already taken out Radio Phnom Penh which around Phnom Penh. So the government had no way of communicating to the populace. So they put in this transmitter, and I don't remember whether it was in Sihanoukville. I think it was in Phnom Penh as a substitute so that the Lon Nol government could still get its message out to the rest of the population. Those guys, as it turned out, and I have to apologize, first of all, when I wrote the book, the two guys that were there for the transmitter were U.S. guys in unmarked uniforms. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I thought they were SEAL or SOG or something. They wouldn't even talk to anybody. As it turned out, I found out 20 years later they were beach jumpers.
Mm-hmm.
That's out of Coronado. That's the Naval Amphibious Base. They were the guys they started in World War II. When they're going to do an amphibious landing, they send these guys in to make sure there are passages for the personnel boats, to unload and so on, and find out where the reefs were and
Okay.
whether you can get in and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know that I had never even heard of beach jumpers when I was military. And I met the guy that was the antagonist in this thing. He's an insurance agent in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so we had lunch and we had a good time and everything. And he goes, yeah, I guess I really was sort of an ass on that trip, playing Buster Bad, you know what I mean? Because he was on this top secret mission and everything. So anyway, for the truck, that was the Sihanoukville mission. I'm in civies. I don't even take a weapon with me. I think I had been in the Merchant Marine in college, so I think I kept my Merchant Marine. They used to have one card then, like a laminated card, and I took that as my ID. Huh. So I get off the LT and I walk down to the end of the pier next to the warehouses where all the weapons are, and this Jeep pulls up. And it's the two naval officers that I'd been dealing with on their ship, you know what I mean, for the weapons supply agreement. And they said, hey, we're here. I said, I'm just here for a little tourism in Sihanoukville. And they said, oh, come on, get aboard. We'll take you around anywhere you want to go, anything you want to see. So they did. And we drove all around. We went to the casino, had lunch somewhere. I remember I bought gas for them at the Esso station in Sihanoukville because I wanted the receipt to show that I'd been in Sihanoukville on the date, in June and so on. So anyway, we got to see the warehouses. We got to replot. Actually, we did, maybe you guys did the same thing in the SEALs. Do you do a port survey?
Yep.
Where you find out where the buoys are, how shallow it is going in, where they are, where the lights are, range lights, if there are any, how long the piers are, how big the warehouses are. So we did all that stuff. I had Tri-X film. I took seven rolls or 6 rolls of 36 frames, which the Navy can't find now. For some reason. I'll tell you that story too. But anyway, so we took a lot of pictures and got a lot of information. And I didn't feel threatened at all. In fact, they even, at the end, we went and had a beer with the port captain of Sihanoukville, who volunteered that the funny-looking vessel out there was a suction dredge that the French had given them. They had to buy because the French quay basin that they made for them for ships, Sihanoukville's on the northeast side of the Gulf of Thailand. There's two monsoons in Vietnam and Cambodia. The northeast one goes on to Vietnam. The southwest monsoon comes up from the southwest and gets a lot of fetch all the way along the Gulf. So you get 12 to 14 foot waves. So it's very hard for ships to stay exposed to that and unload, because of the rise and fall. So the French made this basin that would be protected. But the way they built it with the currents along the coast, the port captain told me, if they didn't continue to vacuum it with the suction dredge, it would silt up and be useless in 6 weeks. So there it was. That right?
Important information.
Easy. Just take out the dredge. You don't have to destroy the place with B-52s or something like that.
Yeah, I remember getting trained up to do those port surveys, which is why that part stood out to me. Now, when you got to Ha Tien, was there a human intelligence network already in place, I'm assuming?
Yes.
And you took that over. And what was the training like to be able to do something like that? Were you trained up beforehand, or was it on-the-job training?
OJT, just you figure.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Now, I had Frank Brown there. He was a professional, guy knowing how to recruit agents and all that stuff. I think I mentioned his one of his agents was the recording secretary of the Lon Nol cabinet, and we'd get third carbons of his notes of the cabinet meetings and so on.
Wow.
Sorry, didn't mean to embarrass anybody, but it was very good. He was really very good. I already had a pre-existing Blackbeard agent network. And what we had is a net handler, a Vietnamese fellow who traveled back and forth across the Cambodian border. And so we were isolated kind of at Phao Dai out on the peninsula. Okay. So he'd come at night on his little scooter and bring the agent reports. And then I'd tell him, okay, look, I want agents all the way up the coast, past Sihanoukville, all the way to the Thai border and so on. And he got me agents. We had usually they were like agro guys. Ha Tien had always been a market for like shrimp and fish going one way and produce coming in from Cambodia the other direction. So people often cross the border for that purpose. So that's how he was involved.
Wow. All right, hopping on to do a quick little video on my EDC. This is just going to be really about the pistol, which for a while now has just been this 365. And I absolutely love this pistol for quite a few reasons. One, it feels good in the hand, and that mag capacity, of course. So right here, this is the P365 by SIG, and I used to carry the Glock 43 before this, but then when this came out, I incorporated it into the pages of True Believer right here, and also started carrying this. So that mag capacity is really what did it for me. I still run the iron sights just because I have so much time running those, not as much time running a red dot. So until I put more time on the range on the red dot, there it is, the irons. So that is that. I don't always carry an extra mag. If I do, I don't have anything else in this pocket except that mag. So that's that. If I have the extra mag, it's in there with nothing else in that pocket. Also, if I'm leaving the house or even around the house, I always have this on me Snake Staff Systems tourniquet. So that is that. And then the holster for this. Also been using this for quite some time. And this is the Black Point Tactical Mini Wing right there. Has the leather on the sides. And what I love about Black Point Tactical is that it says what it's for. So if you have more than one pistol, right here, this says that it's for the 6-hour P365 right there. So ammo right here. I've been running the 365 V Crown here from SIG as well. So just as important as what you carry, of course, is getting that training. A lot of places you can go out there to get training these days. Of course, SIG Academy, there's Thunder Ranch, there's Gunsight. Mickey Shook at Carry Trainer travels around the country putting on classes and seminars. But get that training and stay safe out there. What was it like to recruit a new agent? I assume you worked with someone who knew the language and the culture, but how did you make sure that they weren't a double?
I didn't. In fact, we did it all. The net had been pre-existing. The administrative officer in 60 miles away, one of his lieutenants would come and pay the guy every month on his own. I didn't handle paying the agents or anything like that. I did it all through our net handler guy who we trusted, who had been there for years. Now, I don't know how you can tell if anybody in a situation like that is advertently or inadvertently a double. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just hope that you get enough, you get 51%. You know what I mean? And other than what they could see around what was going on at our places, there really was no exposure to serious intel. They knew the boats were out on the river. They'd go out every night, that sort of thing. So I didn't specifically deal with potential new agents. He would tell me who the agents were that he had, not the name necessarily. We didn't have names, but what the guy. He's a farmer who delivers watermelons to Ha Tien, every month or two or something like that.
And this photo right here, love this photo. There you are right there. And then this one here, this one. And this is you at the Prince's desk at the Summer Palace in Cambodia. And your feet are up on the desk right there. Big smile on your face.
That was the invasion of Kep. That's Prince Sihanouk's desk.
Did you take anything of intelligence value right there, or perhaps a little memento from that desk?
I didn't, but the chief of staff for I got to back up and tell you this story a little bit. When we decided we're going to go into Cambodia, for instance, just to get the Vietnamese refugees out, we sent flotillas up the Mekong River of all sorts of boats and PBRs and swift boats and everything to get people out, and that was very dangerous. When a lawyer friend here was part of that. I got this, because we were supposed to be flexible as Nilos. You could get sent anywhere to do anything. I got sent as the intelligence officer for, I think it was CTF 115, the swift boats in Vietnam. The Commodore, who was a commander, and his chief of staff came out because they wanted to arrange the invasion of Cambodia from the Gulf of Thailand side. They were thinking World War II amphibious invasion at Kep, which was the Summer Palace area. And we also knew there were NVA battalions in the hills above Kep and so on. So they wanted to plan an invasion. I said, wait a minute. You can look at the back of the book, by the way, Jack. The picture there, you can see the mud flats at Kep.
Yeah, it's right here. Yep, right there on the back of the book. I think it's in here too, or in one of these pages over here.
It probably is inside there too. But it was like, I said, wait a minute. You can't do that. I said, you can't. In fact, that's only close to the shore there. The mud flats go out for like almost 2 miles or something.
Wow.
So you're going to bring an LST in there. They can't get in close to the coast to drop the front to get, to unload people and stuff. I said, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to fly guys in big helicopters or something like that. So anyway, that went back and forth. They were pissed off at me that I was telling them that they shouldn't try this. Then the other thing they wanted to do was send PBRs up some of the tributary streams and rivers off the Vinte Canal and the Yangtze River. And I said, it's low water time. You can't do that. The boats they can get up there, but they don't even have enough room to turn around. I said, you're not sending boats up there to get guys waxed. You know what I mean? So that turned out to be a bust. Ultimately, they sent a PGF, one of those jet turbine patrol boats, with them aboard and me, and we invaded, quote unquote, Kep. I think there's photos in there in a couple of flat bottom boats, and we walked around and we got no resistance, and that was the beginning and end of the invasion of Kep.
Wow. I was going to ask you about the Rehnquist memo. Now, what was that?
Oh, this is way after the war.
Yeah.
William Rehnquist was Office of Legal Counsel, the White House lawyers.
Yeah.
And he wrote we never knew for a long time who wrote the legal memo in support of the incursion limited in time and space into Cambodia. In fact, the DOJ sent one of their lawyers up to talk to everybody was against in Cambodia and invading Cambodia and all this stuff. They sent a lawyer up to talk to the New York Bar Association, where there had been a lot of resistance to expanding the war. I forget the fellow's name, but anyway, I said, oh, that's funny. Maybe he wrote the memo or something. I didn't find out till 20 years later when they released it that Rehnquist had been the author of the legal memo justifying the incursion limited in time and space into Cambodia. And I think they did that on purpose because Nixon's intent was he wanted to put Rehnquist on to be Chief Justice, on the Supreme Court, but they didn't want all this static, about the war and so on. So the irony of all this is I ended up sharing the adjunct professor office with Chief Justice Rehnquist at the University of Arizona and corresponded with him about stuff and never knew that he had written the memo until after he had died.
Wow. That's amazing.
But anyway, the whole idea was hot pursuit. I still look at it. I think the doctrine of hot pursuit had actually started in Europe, because there were so many countries close together. It wasn't. I always thought it was originally a naval doctrine. I don't think it was. I think it was originally a land doctrine, that if you had people raiding across your border, you could resist them, and you could under customary international law, you could continue chasing them into somebody else's country to bring them, take them down, if they had been invaded your country. Interestingly, that notion probably in your time became the doctrine under the Bush II administration and so on, that and I think I used to know the exact terms, but if third parties, if belligerents use a third party country to attack U.S. interests in the bordering country, and that third party country cannot or will not stop them from attacking the U.S. interests, the U.S. has a right to go in and take out those offending belligerents and so on. Which, by the way, Erdogan has used immediately thereafter whenever he goes after the Kurds in Turkey, in northwest Turkey and so on. And so he quotes Nixon's language whenever he does that and stuff. But anyway, that became, I think in the 80s, that became Department of Defense doctrine.
Yep. That's why I asked about it, because I was so surprised to read it and realize it's linked to my time.
Yes.
Now, when you think back to your time in Vietnam and Cambodia, about that whole experience, what stands out to you as a whole?
I think for me, it was a formative experience. In retrospect, I would have paid them to be able to take that job. It's easy to say that now when I'm almost 80. Back then it was a little different. But I'm sure you had the same experience. It kind of, you got to have your stuff together. You know what I mean? You can't do these jobs and not do them seriously. I remember that. I love the Cambodian people. They were they reminded me very much of, I'm Italian-American families, Mexican-American families, familia is very important. They would invite me when I went back for the American Bar Association years later. They would invite family from all over Cambodia to get on the train that you could ride for free, because if you sat on the car that blew up, if there were mines, if there were Khmer Rouge mines, they'd come to have a family dinner with you and talk to you and stuff like that. I mean, I couldn't believe how warm they were. And it was interesting, even dealing with their military officers, it was a very positive attitude. And of course, I know they knew I was trying to help them, but also in no way was I Buster Badass. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're tough guys, hey, I'm here to help you. What can we do it's not up to me. I got to tell my bosses, but what can we do to help you? And that kind of sold them, you know what I mean? And it was very interesting to me. I was probably as diplomatic as I've ever been in my life dealing with the Cambodians in that situation, and not being in any way aggressive toward them. You know what I mean? Just being mission oriented and non-aggressive with them, So and that's what I remember about it. The shooting part, you're in a war, you're going to get shot at. I will say my father told me just maybe 2 or 3 valuable things in life. Both my parents were in World War II, not combatants. And my father had me, we were out on the lawn one day, and he said, look, don't worry about getting killed. He said, here's the deal. If your number's up, it's up. If it's not up, it's not up. So don't waste time and energy worrying about it. And you know what? From my observation, he was absolutely correct. So if you get rid, you have to be cautious, but you don't have to be timid and fearful of stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
In fact, like I said, one guy can get away with quite a bit as long as you don't tell anybody what you're planning to do.
And that time with the American Bar Association, was that your first time back? Yeah.
No, this was, I think we went from I was permitted to go by the State Department on the first allowed trip back to Cambodia, even though they were still embargoed. Vietnam and Cambodia were still embargoed. There was a thing called the U.S. Cambodian Friendship Association. Some fellow from D.C. ran. So I think there were 9 of us that got to go on a trip and go back. And anyway, Cambodia really got screwed in the whole thing, because then they were occupied by the North Vietnamese. They were occupied by the South Vietnamese first, after the incursion started for a year. And they were, that was old time military occupation, live off the land, take what you want, all this kind of stuff. And I was interested in reconstruction of Cambodia. And the one thing the U.S. could do for them was provide money for infrastructure, basic making the water system work for Phnom Penh. Law-wise, the Khmer Rouge had taken over and then were driven up to the mountains and the Thai border. Pol Pot had abrogated all the laws of Cambodia. He wanted to have his version of whatever it was, Khmer Rouge government. They kicked everybody out of Phnom Penh, and all his guys took over the real property in Phnom Penh and the buildings and all that stuff all over Cambodia. Well, you're in a place that was basically lawless during the 4 or 5 years, whatever he ran there. So what we had to do was try to do a couple of things. Number one, he had killed or driven out all the lawyers and judges in Cambodia. So we sent guys to retrain lawyers in Cambodia for the provincial military courts. That's where all the legal action was. It wasn't really so much in Phnom Penh or anything, but the provincial courts took care of all these disputes. So we trained lawyers for that. The Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress sent me one trip to bring back all the laws of Cambodia. I carried in one big, like trial bag size thing, and their journal. They're a civil law country. They do it a little differently than we do in common law countries. So I brought that back for them, and then I got the ABA international section to start a project, which we called I think it was the U.S. Indochina Commercial Law Revision Project. And with the guy that was the chairman, a guy named Jerry Libby, an L.A. attorney, and I went and did a trip to then Vietnam, Socialist Republic of Vietnam now, Thailand, Laos, and set up programs there and established liaison. And then we got, I think we got, back then it was like $14 million of aid from USAID to fund these programs and stuff. That's what people don't realize. It's not just stupid money we're giving away. It really greases the skids for a positive relationship with the country and everything. And also, frankly, provides some sources, for the people you can trust in the country to tell you what's going on and things like that. So we did that. And then what happened was Lon Nol, Sihanouk's son, Ranariddh, was a political science professor in France. So we wanted to have there were 4 people. There were the Sihanoukis, the remnant Lon Nol people, basically the armed militias, some of whom were involved with Kun Sa, the guy that brought all the opium into Southeast Asia from Laos. And they all had their own political factions that they were supposed to, in free, fair elections, decide who was going to be running or helping Cambodia. Well, several months into this, the Lon Nol guys waited for Sihanouk's son to have a political rally in a closed compound, and they just threw grenades in the compound while they were there to try to kill most of them off. Well, that was it for the U.S. They cut off all aid except essential, real basic essential aid. That was in 1997. So I think we did the work from 1989 to 1996 or 97 when we got when the aid that we were using was cut off because of the way the government I said Lon Nol. It wasn't the Lon Nol government. It was Hun Sen, who had been the initially the appointed head of Cambodia by the North Vietnamese, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and then has ultimately become the dictator in Cambodia. And I think his kid graduated from the U.S. Military Academy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the son is now, I think, the heir apparent to Hun Sen.
Oh, wow. So your first time back was 1989 after you left in 1970?
No. I got medevaced at the end of 1970, and I was in naval hospitals.
What happened?
Well, never got shot. I got hepatitis A. I think I used to have meals and stuff with my agents and my political contacts in Cambodia, and got hepatitis and pretty badly, and had to be medevaced. Short of I probably 6 or 8 weeks short of my DEROS time, my time to leave.
Oh, wow. And what year did you go back?
Right. They let me out by the time they felt I was healthy enough, they let me out of I was discharged from active duty in the Naval Hospital, St. Albans Naval Hospital in New York on December 30th, 1970. So that's when I got separated and where I got separated.
And it's on to law school from there.
On to law school the following August.
Wow. And what was your first year back to Vietnam and Cambodia?
That was 1989. On that first trip I really wanted to go to Cambodia, but we actually we flew to Bangkok, and then Air France flew us into Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh Ville, Saigon, and then we had to take a van from Saigon up across the Mekong to Phnom Penh. That's the only way you could get to Phnom Penh back then.
Wow, how long of a trip was that in the van?
Most of a day's drive.
Okay.
You couldn't go very fast, and the roads were still getting blown up in places and stuff.
Jeez, did you spend the night in Ho Chi Minh City, or did you get right in the vehicle?
We spent one night in Ho Chi Minh City, and then we stayed in a hotel in Phnom Penh. And by the way, you're talking about all the Casablanca-like, spies and places. Phnom Penh back then was everybody ate at the so-called White Hotel. Okay. The White Hotel. You'd have dinner. You'd have French guys. You'd have Cuban guys. You'd have all Russians there. Everything. It was really like Casablanca.
Oh, wow.
That was really exciting.
What was Ho Chi Minh City like?
The main thing I remember is the trees were enormously bigger. Huh? I remember the way the trees were. Now they were huge, and sometimes you couldn't see landmarks that you were used to in Saigon. The hotels were not as active, like when all the journalists were there and stuff like that. But it was okay. I tried to go see I had a Vietnamese sergeant who was my interpreter driver when I was in Iowa, and I tried to get a rickshaw driver to take me to see him. And we got to the house, and they said, no, don't come in. We didn't want a Western guy, especially American, because they'd be under scrutiny. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they might have a couple questions for him.
Yeah, exactly.
And where did you stay that night in Ho Chi Minh City? Just curious if they had the same hotels when you went back as they had back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, it was one of I'm trying to remember now whether it was the Rex or I think it was the
The Majestic, the Continental Palace.
I think it was the one where the correspondents used to have the 5 o'clock follies. Sorry, I can't remember the name.
Let's see. I think it was Rex or Majestic. I'll have to go back and look.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
Ah, the Carvel. Yep, those were the big ones back then.
That's right. Oh, by the way, my knife was a Gerber.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
It was a Gerber.
So probably a Gerber Mark II back then.
No. It's just a folder.
Just a folder. Okay.
They even had. I looked up the Gerbers. I decided I wanted to bring my own knife, and they had these killer commando knives, to cut people's throats. And I thought, I'm not going to carry that around. Actually, I don't think this was in the book. I put it in the second book. When I finished the Sihanoukville mission, apparently I had a pretty good reputation as a Nilo. They said, you got to go see the head of Naval Special Warfare here. And I said, and I go, right away back then, it's like, am I in trouble? What did I do? So I go and see the guy, and he says, shut the door. And he said, I want you to be my second in command of Naval Special Warfare. That includes the SEALs, all our Green Lantern. We used to send boats up to North Vietnam at night, to draw fire from the coastal batteries and things like that. And I said, I had like 2 months left in my naval tour. You know what I mean? And I said, thank you. I said, first of all, let me tell you. I said, I'm a pretty good collection guy. I think you know that. I said, but I'm not a killer commando. You know what I mean? I don't really want to go cutting people's throats and setting ambushes. And I said, I'm sorry. I know what I do really well, and I'd like to do that well, but I don't really want to do that. And I said, I'm from a family of lawyers. I want to get out and go to law school. You know what I mean? It's been almost 4 years now that I've been out. And he said, yeah. He said, that's fine. He said, but what I need here is somebody who can think, and you can think. And I said, well, thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm flattered, but I don't want to. So I left. And then instead, the Nilo had been killed at Sea Float, which was Indian country. He had been killed in August. It was in our coastal zone, my zone. I didn't get on with my administrative officer. And so he is, for my last 2 months, he assigned me to Sea Float. I was supposed to go to Sea Float to get killed, potentially to get killed. And then first I was going to say, maybe I'll deny my orders. And I thought, no, that's not good. They want me to go. I'll go. Well, and then I got hepatitis really bad. And they medevaced me. They had to end up sending a guy from the staff, N2 staff, who really didn't want to go. He had been to Nilo school, but he swapped jobs with somebody to stay on the staff when they were all sent out to Saigon. They sent him near the end of his tour. He was there 4 hours, got shot through the neck by a Viet Cong sniper down there. A chief saved his life. He didn't die, but he got he got a medical discharge from the Navy and went out. So I didn't much like having hepatitis, but it was better than getting shot to the neck. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah, I would say so. Jeez. Now, when you look back, not just at your experience in Vietnam, but at the American experience in Vietnam, what do you hope that the strategic establishment, our elected representatives, senior military officers, what do you hope they take from that experience and apply to current or future problem sets?
I'm of two minds of that. One is, as far as losing 48,000 guys or 50,000 guys, whatever it is.
Yeah, 58 plus.
And that's just in country, not what happened afterward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With fallout. We don't want to waste lives like that for a purposeless thing. You really, any military thing, you should get in and get out. I think the Defense Department doesn't look at it that way. They want a Bagram Air Base. They want, what do we have? 220 military establishments all over the world and everything.
A lot.
But for a war where you're drafting people and sending them, you better damn well have a real purpose and a real objective. Do you know what I mean? It's very, you asked me about winning the war or not winning, and that sort of thing. To me, that's an American social failing. It's an immaturity and an innocence kind of. It always reminds me of, you go to a football game and people have those foam fingers, wear number one. It's like either wear number one and nobody can touch us, or the opposite is we're losers. No, it's not. That's not the way the world works. You know what I mean? Again, looking at Vietnam, the 10 years we were there, to hear the Prime Minister of Singapore say the U.S. presence there protected a lot of the smaller countries in Southeast Asia from communist assaults and subversion during that period of time. It kept them tied down and so on. You know, you have to be a little more sophisticated about why you do things politically and militarily.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my thing. I'm of two. I learned a lot, I think, in that year. I learned there's some really bad dudes in the world with bad intentions and so on. And I learned that there's also kind of lazy people sometimes in our establishments, and I learned something about war and what your real purposes are in war. Yeah, ultimate victory, so you can wave the wear number one and psychologically be all jacked up about that. But we got to be more sophisticated about that. We're getting to be a grown-up nation now, and we really need to start thinking in nuanced, sophisticated ways about our use of military.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like strategic level lessons. Were there things that you took from your personal experience in Vietnam and applied in law school and your professional life, personal life moving forward, more tactical level lessons that you took with you?
Absolutely. I think it made me a much better lawyer and prosecutor and civil attorney. One thing is drill down. Don't just take the conventional wisdom. Go and talk to the people. Go and view the scene. See what happened here if it was an accident, or see what the documents say about the history of the transaction and stuff. That's where the real information is, not just take, one thing that really struck me talking to Tilt, to Don Stryker Meyer, is even for the SOG guys, okay, we think there's some, we believe there's American POWs being held in this area of Northeast Cambodia. We're going to drop you in with your 6-man indigenous personnel team to try to find them and get them out. Well, they drop them in. They're surrounded by North Vietnamese regiment guys, you know what I mean, with the official uniforms and sneakers and everything, and they got to do immediate extraction and so on. Well, I understand that they need to find things out, but I don't know, telling them it's one thing about American POWs being there. I don't know whether that was or wasn't true, but putting them into harm's way, you know what I mean, without telling them what the likelihood is. And I think I talked to Tilt about it, and I said, I think they were just putting you in to confirm that this North Vietnamese regiment was there in force. You know what I mean? Then they could call in B-52 strikes on it. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So anyway, I'll tell you one larger thing that I took. I don't want to, and I never have, well, maybe a little bit. I don't like working for establishments, big companies, big corporations, big government, big military, because a lot of those guys are worrying about feathering their own nest, and they don't really care about the poor grunt who has to go out and do it. And not that people shouldn't do it. I think there are plenty of people willing to do that, but don't lie to them to put them in harm's way so they're surprised. Yep.
Yeah, there's so many similarities between your time in uniform and mine, and it's just been such an honor to talk to you today. Thank you so much for sharing these stories. And what did I miss?
Well, let's see. I just a couple of things, really. First of all, I wanted to tell you, I got a lot of medals and stuff for my tour, but the best compliment I ever got was from the SOG guys. I think through Tilt, I got invited up to there's a Special Forces alumni group, Special Forces Association.
Yep. Special Operations Association.
They have a big chapter in LA. They asked me to come up and talk about the Nilo tour and the book. So I went up there, and this is pretty good. It was in a American Legion place or something. They had a little bar, but it was early in the morning, so we sat at the bar and had coffee before the meeting began. And I had two SWAT guys sitting on either side of me who I didn't know. And I said, I got to tell you guys, I said, I had a roommate who was SOG and, Saigon and stuff. And I said, and now finding out what you guys did, I think you guys were crazy, getting dropped into North Vietnam and Northeast Cambodia. That was all NVA and doing these missions, I said, you're crazy. I would never do stuff like that. And so they said, well, it's just our job. We did our job. So anyway, I do my Nilo talk and we go back to the bar and we're sitting there drinking Cokes. And the two guys come back and they say, well, listen, we liked your book and we liked your talk, but we just want to tell you, we think you were bloody crazy going in by yourself without backup, without an extraction plan, without heavy weapons, da 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 da. And so we all started laughing. And I said, well, I guess you just choose your crazy. That's all it is.
Just choose your crazy. I love that.
I want to just show you two things. Had one of my students, law students in my LLM class, was a Vietnamese lawyer, a woman. And so we get talking about this stuff. And she said her best friend's father was had fought at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and so let me just show you here. I've never gotten to wear them, but that's all my medals.
Wow, look at that. That's amazing. Look at that. BSV right there.
Yeah.
And
anyway, so I said, they gave us medals. And so wow. She talked to him, and I got a letter from the guy, and he gave me his medal from participating at Dien Bien Phu against the French.
Wow.
For the Viet Minh,
Oh wow.
And that's his little aluminum stamped medal.
Wow. And there it says Dien Bien Phu right there. Wow.
But I mean, that's all they got for Dien Bien Phu. That's what I thought was funny.
That's amazing.
And you got one other. Somehow I was in communication with the French defense attaché at the French embassy in Washington. And I was talking to him about we were talking about the Foreign Legion, stuff, the Foreign Legion. And I said, I just wonder, Foreign Legion was everywhere. And not only did they get shot up and killed, they got tropical diseases everywhere. They were out in these remote places. And I said, did you guys have like a Purple Heart? And he said, yeah, we did, but it was more than a Purple Heart. We gave medals if they got diseases in the place, were impaired by disease in the place. And they said that's included in our medal. And I said, oh, it's interesting. Purple Heart, we just, you got to bleed, for it. And so he said, yeah, that's true. Well, anyway, then I get in the mail the next week the French medal for the Foreign Legion.
Oh, wow.
For getting hepatitis at the end of my Nilo.
Hey, look at that. That's amazing.
Anyway, what I'm saying is comrades at arms, you know what I mean? After it's all over and stuff, it's really good.
Wow. That is pretty wild.
Okay, this is one I'd like to come in intelligence staff analysts. I don't care whether they're CIA or Naval Intelligence, the guys sitting behind the desk in the headquarters, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My agents, as low level as they were very good. As they knew the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong knew the American and South Vietnamese incursion was coming, the invasion was coming. In the weeks before, they moved back from the border. They moved the Sihanoukville trail further away from the border, knowing that they were going to at least get challenged on the Cambodian side of the border and stuff. They also went further inland. The North Vietnamese captured the Angkor Wat area of Cambodia, and my agents were the first to report that. It was pretty far inland. Now it's way up there in Cambodia. So I report that. I get a message back from the staff analyst saying, oh, this is impossible. The North Vietnamese have no interest in being in the the Angkor Wat area. They just, they're interested in getting across from the border. And I said, no, these guys saw them, and anyway, okay. 20 years later, a guy named Francois Bizot, who's a professor at the Sorbonne, writes a book called The Gate about his captivity by the Khmer Rouge as a European. He's the only European, I think, that survived, that lived his captivity by the Khmer Rouge. He was a postdoc at the time doing oral interviews of the villages and hamlets around Angkor Wat to find out their oral traditions about what Angkor Wat was used for, what were the religious ceremonies that you heard in the generations and so on, how did they farm, all this sort of thing. Well, he reports that he's doing these travels around Angkor Wat on June 19th, I think it was, 9th or 19th, 1970, he was addressed by the North Vietnamese commander of the Angkor Wat region, who wrote him out a safe conduct pass because he was a French guy, you know what I mean, just doing research for the other North Vietnamese checkpoints that he'd be encountering in traveling around the Angkor Wat area. So the point is, yes, the Vietnamese had taken over Angkor Wat by June 9th or 19th, 1970, despite what the staff analyst thought about why they had no interest in being there. Wow. In fact, one of the things they did was there's a place just northeast of Angkor Wat that had some of the first three-dimensional Cambodian sculptures. Everything had been sort of bas-relief until then. They cut off the ankles. It was a traditional Cambodian wrestling pose where they do classical wrestling. They cut off them at the ankles. They took the statues to Bangkok and sold them on the black market.
Oh, wow.
So that was one of the reasons they wanted to be in Angkor Wat was to pilfer. And that really offended me, you know what I mean, to steal the cultural treasures and stuff. But anyway, they were there. I used to lecture for the USS Midway Museum here in San Diego, where we brought high school teachers from all over the country about intelligence. And I said, frankly, a conclusion of mine from my year there was get competent people, put them in the field. They have to have skill sets. If they're Navy, they should know about boats and navigation and guns and all this kind of stuff. And always trust the guy in the field to make a better judgment about whether something is true or not compared to somebody at the staff who's read a lot of books or, you know what I mean,
or maybe not.
Or has his own mosaic background of what he thinks is going on in the field. And I said, you always trust the guy in the field. So put competent people who will tell you the truth in the field, because that's much better intelligence than whatever the staff analysts are saying.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you for sharing all of that. Did we miss anything else? Because there's so much.
That's pretty much it.
I mean, it's an incredible experience that you had there that's so unique. In talking to people who spent time in country or along the border or wherever it may have been, your experience there as a naval intelligence officer, running these network, going into Cambodia, reporting back up, doing things without approvals so you wouldn't get compromised. It's just such a unique story, and I really appreciate you, one, doing it, and two, sharing it with me in this audience. So thank you for what you did back then, and thank you for what you're doing today and sharing these stories.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your series. I've watched a number of your interviews and so on, and for number one, I like the way you do them. That's very good. I think from Ashley that your mother was a librarian.
That's right. That's right.
So was my mother.
Oh, no kidding. Oh,
Yeah, and I said I think that's how you become a reader.
It was for me, and it was my mom made it just a natural part of the day. It wasn't something you were forced to do. It was just a natural part of the day, just like anything else. So it wasn't odd. It wasn't an outlier. It wasn't something you were trying to rush through. It was just a natural thing, and it became a part of me very early on. And I've been this lifelong reader that's really provided a foundation for everything else that I've done, whether it's in the military or now as a writer. So it's I can't thank her enough for making reading and books a part of my life.
My mother was one of the very first women commissioned officers in the Coast Guard in World War II.
No kidding. So what did she do?
And you might like this story. They were in New York. My father was a lawyer then, so he was like an admiral's aide. He was a chief, some senior chief, but he was the admiral's legal aide. They didn't send women to combat back then. So she ran the so-called motor pool, which is kind of the catch-all administrative thing. So she would staff the Coast Guardmen that were sent out to the south shore of Long Island. There was a Coast Guard station at Amagansett out on the east end of Long Island on the Atlantic Ocean side. She happened to assign this guy named Punchy. You can look up Punchy. He was a boxer. He had been a boxer. He was a young guy. But they used to send the people that weren't quite competent enough to be out on the line doing things, So he was sent out to Amagansett to be a part of the beach patrol. They'd walk up and down the beach. Punchy encountered the German spies that came ashore in the rubber boat from the submarine, from a U-boat. And they were in civilian clothes, and they had some cock and bull story about they were on a fishing boat that sank, and that's how they're, blah, 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 blah. And they said, could you help us? We have to make sure nobody steals our stuff. And I think they gave them $500 or something like that. And they buried their gear and stuff. And then the guys just took, they had all gone to school in New York. So, they were bilingual. They were in civilian clothes. One guy had gone to Columbia, I think, or something. They knew the Long Island Railroad, to get into the city and everything, and then disperse throughout the country. So Punchy helped them all, you know what I mean? And they buried, and the guys took off to get to the Long Island Railroad. Punchy turned around and went back to the Amagansett station, called in what had happened. The 6 spies were rounded up within a week, I think. They were tried at some of the first military commissions. I think they hung 6 of them, and then a long prison sentence for the guy that cooperated, the German spy that cooperated with them and everything. And it was a big deal, German spies invading the U.S. and stuff. And my mother always said, this is what I like. She said, yes, that's true. Punchy was punchy, but he wasn't stupid.
Wow. I remember they made a movie about it. I watched when I was a kid, a black and white movie about it, I think.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I remember watching it at my grandmother's. That's amazing. I hadn't thought of that story for a long time until you just mentioned it. But yeah, there was a real threat of Nazi submarines off the coasts, and people kind of forget about that from the World War II days.
Down the Long Island Sound too, and get the end of the Long Island Railroad Oyster Bay line. They could just get on and get into the city and so on.
Jeez, that is amazing.
It's amazing. That was amazing.
Wow.
I got to thank you. This has really been fun for me. I'm glad it was fun. You know what I mean?
So it's fun for me too. I always learn so much, and I really appreciate you spending the time.
I hope we get to meet sometime, either here or where you are or something.
Yes.
I'd love to have dinner with you and your wife and stuff.
That'd be fantastic. I'm going to stay in touch, and I'm going to let you know if I pass through San Diego on this next book tour. I hope I do. If not, it'll be a book tour after that, but we should for sure link up as at least on the book tour I pass through at the very least. But thank you so much again, and it's been an honor.
And thank you for doing it. It's been an honor for me too. Thanks a lot, Jack.
Take care.
Okay, you too.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.